Hi, I'm Meredith Holliday, and this is my husband Dana. We are flight instructors and the owners of Holiday Aviation, a flight school based at the Craig Airport here in Jacksonville, Florida. When you hear the word ultralight, you might envision some sort of bizarre home-built contraption made by strapping plywood wings to a motorcycle. You might think ultralights are motorized toys like jet skis or ATVs, since no training or license is required to own or operate them. This perception is understandable, since the FAA doesn't consider ultralights to be real airplanes either. If the thing flies, carries a single human occupant, and weighs less than 254 pounds, the FAA calls it an ultralight vehicle, not an airplane. But make no mistake, ultralights are real airplanes that abide by the same rules of physics and aerodynamics as this Cessna 152. You can kill yourself in an ultralight if you don't learn how to fly it properly, just like a real airplane.
That's where we come in. I've been flying ultralights and light sport aircraft for more than 30 years. In this first of what we hope will be an extensive series of educational videos, Meredith and I will show you why it's critical to treat ultralight airplanes with the respect they deserve.
In this video, we'll be introducing the concept of an advanced qualification program for ultralights and light sport aircraft. AQP is a scenario-based training protocol used by the airlines. The primary goal of AQP is to prevent pilot error by identifying and training for the specific scenarios that lead to aircraft accidents. In the general aviation world, which includes ultralights and light sport aircraft, the most common scenarios where pilots get themselves into trouble include maneuvering in the traffic pattern, crosswind takeoffs and landings, go-arounds, maintaining aircraft control during an inadvertent IMC encounter, and handling emergencies such as a loss of thrust on takeoff.
The problem with regard to the number of ultralight accidents, as I see it, is really threefold. First and foremost is the problem of the lack of adequate training that's available in the United States and elsewhere. Clearly, there are not many options with regard to where you can train, who you can train with, what type of aircraft are available, and so forth. If you're an aspiring ultralight pilot with no flight experience, a great option is to visit your local flight school and purchase an introductory flight lesson in an aircraft like this two-seat Cessna 152. Keep in mind, though, that if you weigh more than about 200 pounds, you might be over gross weight with an instructor and full fuel on board. If you're a big guy, you may need to fly something like a four-seat Cessna 172 for this initial flight training experience. Ideally, you want to find a seasoned instructor like me who has experience flying ultralights or light sport aircraft. The key things you want to learn from this instructor are basic flight maneuvers, including takeoff, climbs, descents, turns in both directions, slow flight, stalls and stall recovery, and the sight picture for a normal approach and landing. Most pilots can learn these basic skills in a few sessions with a good instructor, then transition to an ultralight trainer like our two-seat Breeze LSA to get a feel for the unique handling characteristics of an ultralight.
The rules regarding the operation of ultralight aircraft are brief and contained entirely in Part 103 of the Federal Aviation Regulations.
Obviously, if you have a single-seat ultralight, you can't get training in that. So in a lot of ways, you're a test pilot when you're flying a single-seat ultralight. You're not only testing the airframe, which is really not the weak link in the chain, you're testing your ability to fly an aircraft that you've never flown before. Thirdly, poor decision-making on the part of the pilot is a big issue with regard to these accidents. Primarily, I'm talking about pilots who are flying at sites that are really not suitable, not so much from the standpoint of being able to take off and land, but the area around that takeoff and landing spot often is not suitable in the event of an engine failure.
In a few minutes, we're going to unpack 3 local ultralight crashes, including one where the pilot chose this industrial park as the site for his first flight in his airplane.
We'll often see on social media and elsewhere the pilots asking, where should I go for this training? There's nobody in my area. What should I do? How do I go about learning to fly this aircraft? And too often we see the responses such as, well, it'll be okay, just taxi the aircraft, do a few crow hops. Once you do a couple crow hops and you kind of get for the feel for the airplane, you're going to be just fine, just go for it. I can tell you this is not a good idea. So you've heard us talk about high drag, low inertia aircraft, and I'd like to explain a little bit about what we mean by that. Low inertia really is low weight. These aircraft are fairly light. This one weighs about 680 pounds, give or take. Very lightweight, as opposed to, say, even a Cessna 150 that's going to come in at an empty weight a little over 1,000 pounds. Cessna 172 maybe 1,600 pounds. So because you have less weight, you have less inertia, which means if you have an engine failure or you're just throttling back, you're not going to have as much weight pushing you through the air. The high drag aspect of it, you can see. If you look at the wing, you can see how fat this wing is. This is a very high lift, and by definition, high lift is going to be high drag shape of this wing. You can see it has a flat bottom, it's fairly thick, and look at all the things out here that are creating drag. You got the lift struts, the jury struts, you've got the engine, the pod on the front of it will certainly reduce drag, and a lot of these aircraft, Quicksilvers, the Breeze, a lot of them don't have this pod, so that's going to obviously reduce drag, but a lot of the aircraft that we're talking about don't have this pod, so you've got quite a bit more drag. Imagine if this pod was not here, how much drag you've got with the seats, the occupants, and whatnot. And also the tubing, the airframe, the design, just lots of drag. The additional problem is, okay, we have a site here, we have an instructor, we have an aircraft. There isn't a lot of time typically, especially in hot summer days, during hot summer days, where you can really do training and be comfortable with how the airplane is handling with regard to thermals, wind, things like that. So we've had people travel from as far as England, Wyoming, different areas of the country, again, because of the travel aspect of getting adequate training. And we'll get out here and we might be fogged in the morning, or we may have some low ceilings. So quite often we get grounded just because of weather conditions. And that adds to the frustration of being able to get hours in the airplane, and there's really nothing we can do about that. We really want to train when the conditions are fairly calm, fairly smooth. I use the analogy all the time. Flying ultralights versus heavier aircraft is kind of like throwing a wiffle ball in the wind versus a golf ball. These are the wiffle balls. If you throw a wiffle ball in the wind, look at its trajectory. If you throw a golf ball in the wind, look at its trajectory. And these are the wiffle balls. They're getting kicked around very easily. And again, not that you can't fly in those conditions, but it's just not ideal for a training environment.
We shot this next clip at about 11 a.m. when the outside air temperature was in the low to mid 80s. And you'll see Dana, who has tons of experience in this aircraft, getting kicked around quite a bit on his approach.
Versus, Cessna 150 or conventional style light sport aircraft, like a, sport cruiser or something?
Well, because it's got a much fatter wing and a lot more drag, it's much less responsive. So you have to do a lot more with the controls to get the plane to do what you want it to do.
Yeah, I felt that.
It's almost like it doesn't want to cooperate.
Right.
But that's the handling characteristics of this airplane. Right now we're on basically a midfield crosswind, and I'm going to turn to the upwind leg, and I'll kind of talk us through my approach here. Aircraft that are very high drag, low inertia, they act a lot differently when you throttle back, meaning if you throttle back, in order to maintain airspeed, you're going to need much more pitch down to maintain airspeed. And I'll give give you an example. If I maintain this pitch attitude, if you look at the airspeed indicator, it's indicating about 60 miles per hour.
Right.
If I throttle all the way back, watch that airspeed drop.
Yeah, very
And we're down to 40 just like that. Now, there's my pitch attitude for 60 right there. And that's usually what I use coming in is 55 to 60. So you can see a pretty radical pitch down attitude.
Very
And that's
much
what
so.
gets a lot of people in trouble when they fly conventional aircraft and then they go out and fly an ultralight, and if they don't get the proper training, whether that's ground or flight or both, that is something that creates problems real quick. The other big difference is most of the ultralights that are operated under Part 103, and a lot of planes like this that are light sport aircraft, they don't have stall warning indicators. They don't have a light, they don't have a horn. And on the one hand, we can argue that you really shouldn't need a stall warning. Now, we're getting beat up a little bit by thermals here, but you can see on final here, I've got the throttle back. And because of the low inertia of this thing, I pretty much never landed with the throttle at idle, unless I'm demonstrating a power off simulated engine out landing. You'll hear the engine RPM increase here, and I'm at about 3,500 RPM. And basically, just like with any plane, we're coming down trying not to land.
Cherokee 61 with flight is 4 nautical miles.
And you can see you can get a really good landing there
2,000 feet for a left teardrop entry.
with a little throttle on. Next time around, I'll come in with the throttle at idle, and you'll see how much quicker it hits the ground. You're almost never going to land this airplane with the throttle off unless you have an engine out. I fly my traffic patterns at 500 feet because that's where the AIM likes you to fly your ultralights, so that's what I teach, so that people can get an idea of what it looks like visually, and also allows them to learn the profile for descent. Now, if you keep an eye on the airspeed indicator, here we are. We're pretty close to the runway. On the downwind leg, our offset's pretty close. I'm going to throttle all the way back and watch the difference here. So there's 60. With a little bit of turbulence, I might come in a little bit faster, so I might punch it down to 65 or 70. Cherokee's off the field.
Yeah, you really come down.
You can see you coming down like a brick. And now watch when I round out and flare. Watch how quickly this thing hits the ground. So you're on the ground now.
Yeah, wow, that's different.
And if I lose an engine right here, I got to get down fast.
This crash occurred at Hilliard last summer. A student pilot in his light sport aircraft got distracted by a lawnmower on the runway and stalled turning onto the downwind leg. He's very lucky that a big tree in a neighbor's yard caught him just right, and he was able to walk away with just minor cuts and bruises. The AQP scenario involved in this crash is the pilot's loss of speed awareness in the traffic pattern. The next crash we want to discuss involved a Freebird ultralight similar to this one. The pilot, who had a few hours of training in a two-seat aircraft, chose an industrial park as the site for his first flight in his airplane. Unfortunately, the engine quit immediately after takeoff and he crashed into a wooded area nearby. The aircraft was destroyed and he was badly injured, but he survived.
So on paper, and even visually, that site might be tempting, but it looks really rough. And now you can see clearly at the departure end, if he was headed westbound, there's a significant amount of power lines. So you think the trees were to the left of the tracks or to the right of the tracks?
I think he went over this road and hit those trees right there.
We originally thought, based on the pilot's description of the site, that he took off from this dirt strip parallel to the railroad tracks to the west. But the day after we shot the video, a friend of the pilot sent us cell phone video which suggests he took off from this driveway to the northwest. The pilot's poor decision-making cost him a month in the hospital. This is the industrial park where the crash happened, just south of the Jacksonville International Airport. There's lots of power lines along this road. I'm on Zoo Parkway right now, heading west. Basically a beam of the crash site. This is Imison Park Boulevard. There may be a better view off this road, but you can see, look, it's all industrial warehouse space. The terrain over here is not very forgiving. There's lots of brush, trees everywhere. The third crash we want to address was fatal. It was the pilot's first flight in his brand new factory-built ultralight. He held a private pilot certificate, but had not been current or flown as pilot in command in over 30 years. In the weeks before the crash, he'd made a few local flights with a friend in the friend's plane, but clearly had not achieved proficiency. He was strongly advised not to fly his ultralight until he could log more training, including stalls and spin awareness, and simulated engine failures in flight. Unfortunately, he did not heed his friend's advice, with tragic results. Part of the problem in addressing the issue of ultralight safety is the lack of accident data. If you search for ultralight crashes in the NTSB's database, you'll find just 270 reports logged since 1982. It's unclear why some ultralight crashes are included and others are not. One final thought, and this is really important to understand. Dana and I are not suggesting that the FAA impose additional regulations or restrictions on ultralight pilots or sport pilots. However, because of arbitrary and inconsistent FAA regulatory guidance, pilots of light aircraft are often left to their own devices and, unfortunately, often make poor choices. An ultralight might be ultralight, but it is a real airplane. You can really hurt or kill yourself if you don't respect it. As the pilot, you must make the choice to invest in your own safety. Gravity wins every time.